You're listening to a Roddenberry podcast.
Mission Log, a Roddenberry Star Trek podcast, episode 527, Drone.
Welcome into another episode of Mission Log, a Roddenberry Star Trek podcast. I'm John Champion.
And I'm Norman Lau. Each week on Mission Log, we examine an episode of Star Trek, picking it apart for the morals, meanings, and messages, and asking ourselves if it stands the test of time.
This week, Drone, the one about one. But not that one. We did that one a few weeks ago, and it was the one about 7 being the one on the ship. This one is a different one, and instead of 7, it's 1. And I'll be right back in a moment with trivia, but first, Norman would like to tell all of you how to reach us.
Mission Log is a conversation about Star Trek. Drop us a line at missionlog@roddenberry.com and join us on X and Facebook at Mission Log Pod. While you're at it, leave us a review and a rating at Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast platform. And please remember, your comments could be used on Mission Log or Engage on the Roddenberry YouTube channel.
We'll get back to Drone right after a word from this week's sponsor, Tribble Toys. Have you ever wished you could bring home your very own Tribble? Well, those adorable little creatures have captured the hearts of fans since 1967, when writer David Gerrold introduced them to the world.
And did you know, in 2008, David himself co-founded Tribble Toys. That's right, these are the only Tribbles personally approved by the man who brought them to life. And since then, Tribble Toys has found forever homes for over 140,000 Tribbles. It's like a furry revolution, John.
Oh, that's beautiful. That's a beautiful story right there. 140,000 Tribbles go to their forever homes. And here is the best part. Tribbles come in all shapes and sizes, making them the perfect pets for any Star Trek fan. And yes, you can adopt yours today.
Speaking of adoption, John, have you ever imagined adopting a Borg Tribble?
Is that adoption or is that assimilation?
Well, I mean, you can't have your own drone, but you can now adopt your own Borg Tribble. That's right. You heard me right. Borg Tribbles are here, and they're at a new, lower price. Picture this.
Oh.
Collectible Borg Tribbles in 4 colors, batteries included, making 2 different Borg Tribble sounds. 2 different Borg Tribble sounds. And the best part, they're now only $49 a piece.
Wait, I think I hear those Borg Tribble sounds right now. Let's give it a listen. All right, remember that these collectible Borg Tribbles contain small parts and are not intended for children under 12. Safety first. But what are you waiting for? Head on over to TribbleToys.com and adopt your very own Borg Tribble today, or choose from one of over 20 other breeds.
And don't forget to sign up for their newsletter to stay in the loop about monthly specials and discounts. Go ahead, make your home a little fuzzier with Tribble Toys.
As always, remember to tell them that Mission Log sent you. Support our sponsor, Tribble Toys. Visit TribbleToys.com. Sign up for the newsletter to hear about monthly specials and discounts.
Far be it from me to drone on. Here's John Champion with this week's trivia.
Well done. All right, we have a story this week by Brian Fuller and Harry Kloor, and we're at the final of the 4 stories that are credited to Harry. Go back to Season 3 for his first contribution, Real Life. Then in Season 4, he was credited with stories for The Raven and Scientific Method. Now, of course, we know that stories change as they are developed into scripts. The original pitch had Tom Paris in a crashed shuttle and his badly damaged body put back together with Borg tech. It was considered too gruesome. So he came back with a pitch that resulted in an unstoppable Terminator-esque 29th century drone, which certainly piqued everyone's interest, but it went through several revisions to find the right tone. So that's why we have a teleplay credit that goes to Brian Fuller and Brannon Braga and Joe Menosky. And you may be surprised that it was Brannon who really found the heart of this story and pushed for the childlike version of the drone who learns from the Voyager crew. Not credited on this story is Rick Berman, who ultimately found the conclusion of the story with a moment of sacrifice. This was directed by Les Landau, a familiar name to be sure, but it has been a while since we saw Les. He directed an early Season 3 episode, The Shoot, and that was the last time we saw him on Voyager until now. But over on DS9, he was directing a couple of episodes of their 7th season, Image in the Sand and After Image, around the same time as this Voyager installment. And let's meet our guest stars. We get to meet a Voyager crew member who has a name. It's Transporter Tech Ensign Mulcahy, and he's played by Todd Babcock. Now, Todd got his start in the 90s, and right around the time of this episode of Voyager, he was in other genre shows like Buffy and Sliders. Later on, he makes appearances in feature films like Tim Burton's Planet of the Apes and the Ian McKellen vehicle about director James Whale, Gods and Monsters. This is Todd's only Star Trek appearance. But making a return appearance is J. Paul Boehmer, playing the titular drone in this episode. You may not recognize him under all the Borg appliances, but we did see him pretty recently. He was the German Kapitan in both parts of The Killing Game, and we also noted him in the DS9 episode Tacking into the Wind. He'll be back in both alien and human visages when we get to Enterprise.
Welcome to the Delta Quadrant. If you thought unexpected lizard parenthood was wild, just step into the transporter.
Prologue. In the cargo bay, 7 of 9 practices the very human trait of smiling in a mirror. But her privacy is interrupted when the doctor barges in to collect her for an astronomical survey mission. It should be a simple ride. Tom Paris, B'Elanna, Seven, and the Doctor will fly in a shuttle close to the birth of a new nebula, but they quickly hit the nebula's shear and need to be beamed back to Voyager for safety. The patterns lose cohesion, and Mulcahy, the transporter chief, manages to sort them out with some quick adjustments. They all arrive on Voyager, but the Doctor's holo-emitter has fused some of its circuits. B'Elanna transfers the Doctor's program to sickbay while she and Mulcahy take the damaged emitter to the science lab to run an overnight diagnostic. When they leave, the emitter comes to life with Borg technology and establishes a connection with the lab computer. Act 1. With Harry Kim in command overnight, Voyager holds steady near the nebula as it balloons in size. The Doctor wakens B'Elanna over a computer terminal early to get an update on his emitter. Meanwhile, in the cargo bay, 7 of 9 is stirred awake from regeneration with deep concern that her proximity sensor is active, which means a Borg presence could be nearby. What none of them know is that the mobile emitter has been making short work of Voyager's science lab computer. The first one to discover the change is Mulcahy, who enters the now transformed lab bathed in green light. He is immediately struck with Borg tech, and when he is, Seven's proximity sensor is alerted. Seven, Tuvok, and a security detail converge on the lab and find Mulcahy unconscious on the floor. He hasn't been assimilated, rather he has had some of his genetic material extracted, and Seven recognizes residual nanoprobes that match her own specific encoding. Even more shocking, she approaches what appears to be a Borg maturation chamber in the room, using technology she has never seen before to develop and protect a Borg being in a fetal stage of life. Act 2. When Janeway arrives on the scene, Seven has a hypothesis. Her nanoprobes and the Doctor's emitter were partially fused in the transporter incident the day before. This technology is now expressing itself, using whatever materials are available to it. Voyager's computers, the holo-emitter, some human DNA. Janeway recognizes the potential threat and orders Tuvok to establish a force field around the area, but she'll keep the being on board for now, out of curiosity. Meanwhile, the fetus is growing at an incredible rate. An hour later, and the Doctor determines that this new drone is approximately the size and maturity of a 6-year-old male human child. The armor and technology on this Borg are a little different, though, given that the nanoprobes were fused with a piece of 29th century technology. The doctor's exam also reveals that his holo-emitter unit is embedded in the drone child's cerebral cortex and therefore impossible to remove without killing him. As the new, highly advanced drone races toward full maturity, Janeway is faced with a choice. Either eliminate the threat of him being assimilated into a more powerful Borg, or let Seven teach him human values. In other words, try to reach this individual drone on the same level that Seven first was severed from the collective and joined Voyager. Seven accepts the assignment and attempts to speak with the drone, which currently has no designation, no function. He doesn't understand when Seven attempts to explain that he is an individual apart from the collective, and she takes the risky next step of establishing a direct neural interface. That is successful, but the drone immediately wants more and forces Seven to stay connected, even as Tuvok attempts to break the connection with a phaser. Only when Seven expresses pain does the drone break the connection and agrees that he will comply. Act 3. Now the whole crew is pitching in to help this new drone learn to adapt to life on Voyager. He's taking in information but still confused about concepts of his own identity. The more he learns about Voyager and its mission and crew, the more he wants to know, and especially about life in a Borg collective. Seven and Neelix both deflect the questions about Borg life, and Neelix encourages this individual drone to pick a designation for himself. Being an individual, he selects 1 while on his way to a medical scan. The Doctor and 1 discuss the drone's technology, and 1 is aware that the Doctor's mobile emitter is crucial to regulating his own central nervous system. It's advanced technology from the 29th century, and by extrapolation, that makes 1 a more advanced being. He asks the Doctor to explain his own origin, and the Doctor obliges by recounting the transporter mishap. 1 is struck by the realization that he is an accident, but the Doctor reassures him that he is welcome and that Voyager's mission is to explore whatever forms of life they encounter. Next stop, engineering, where a surly B'Elanna Torres doesn't welcome the visit by Seven and 1, but 1 proves his worth by, on the fly, creating a calculation to monitor the nebula's rate of expansion. It turns B'Elanna's attitude from annoyance to amazement. Last stop is Janeway's ready room, where the captain is pleased to meet 1. He asks if he is sufficient, and Janeway says he's not there to be assessed. She was just curious to meet him. With that, 1 excuses himself to help out in engineering, and once Seven and Janeway are alone, Seven expresses her concern that 1 is curious about the Borg. Janeway assures Seven that maybe it's best that 1 learn about the Borg from the Voyager crew rather than from the Borg themselves. Later that night, Seven gives 1 a place to regenerate in the cargo bay, but the drone wants to learn more. She convinces him to regenerate, and he offers thanks for her help and for the space that is suited for a Borg. As soon as regeneration begins, a transponder activates on 1, and a Borg sphere in the distance picks up the signal, and their course is altered to intercept. Act 4. Upon awakening, Seven is confronted by Janeway and a security crew. A Borg ship is on its way because 1 contacted them, only he didn't know it. His transceiver had been deactivated, but somehow the technology adapted. 1 wants to meet them, and the Borg ship is only hours away. That leaves Janeway and Seven only a little time to try to get 1 up to speed on why the Borg are considered enemies. He absorbs the information, but still wants to meet them, communicate with them, join them. Janeway tries to make him understand that the Borg are destructive and will strip away his individuality along with that of everyone on Voyager. He turns to Seven and asks if she wants to rejoin the collective, but Seven answers that Voyager is her collective. The Borg vessel approaches, and even 1 is hit with anxiety. Seven explains that the entire crew is filled with anxiety at the prospect of engaging the Borg. Janeway will fight back, but 1 states that resistance is futile. Act 5. The Borg open a channel and repeat their familiar opening. You will be assimilated resistance is futile. Both 1 and 7 hear the voices in their minds, but each knows that they need to resist. 1 enhances Voyager's shields to stave off the first attack, but his phaser enhancement is repulsed by the Borg ship, knocking out Voyager's warp drive along with it. The only option he has now is to communicate with the collective. 1 beams himself aboard the Borg ship, and he resists. He takes over control and pilots it directly into the protonebula, where the conditions crush the vessel. Just as quickly as it's gone, Harry Kim picks up a life sign. It's 1, protected in a force field. But when he is beamed to sickbay, he's in bad shape. The technology may be regenerating, but his biology is badly damaged. The doctor needs to take quick action, but 1 realizes that the Borg will continue to pursue him. Voyager is in danger as long as he is there. As the doctor attempts medical intervention, 1 thwarts him with a force field. 7 begs him to comply, but just before dying, 1 says that she will adapt. Devastated, 7 returns to the cargo bay and shuts down 1's regeneration alcove, and then catches a glimpse of her own expression of sadness in the mirror. The end.
So I'm going to have to do another drone pun. Yeah. Or I don't have to if either I'm going to be droning on or I'm so glad that John's recap was so tight because we wouldn't want him to drone on either. Right?
Yes. Thank you. Well, in the interest of not droning on, I will jump right to it and say that my first observation out of the gate, that holo-imaging device that the doctor has, I love it because it's huge. And like you think about what we have now, like you have a smartphone, and a lot of them can take 3D images and do very complex video work. But in the future, the holo-imaging device is massive, and I really want to see that prop sometime. I really want to see the details on that. I kind of love it.
Here's another one of those things that we keep bringing up with the Doctor and his abilities. So, how is it that his optical inputs, also known as eyes, don't just capture what he's looking at in a memory file?
What an interesting idea. He could literally just look at something and say, okay, store that. Yeah.
He literally shouldn't forget anything, right? Because he's just basically one active memory file.
Yeah.
Right? So,
that's interesting.
But it wouldn't be as fun because then we wouldn't see that cool prop.
Right. Well, and I guess he's sort of like his way of integrating with the crew is to do things like the crew does. Somebody wrote to us about that in our Discord, in Patreon actually, and just said, hey, maybe things like the Doctor reading computer terminals is because Zimmerman trained the Holo Doctor, the EMH, to do that, because it integrates him with the humanoid life forms that he's around.
Yeah.
And that's a great idea. I also think that he could be way more efficient,
One thing I did love seeing when the Doctor and 7 were walking through the hallway, you got to see 2 diverse cast members in the background.
Yes.
And I thought that was great. I think that's nice to see not just the diversity there, but just to see kind of like the ship populated with other crew members on occasion.
Yeah, for whatever reason, this episode I feel like it had more background in it.
It did.
More, and I want more of that, please. Yeah. Definitely privacy concerns on Voyager. I mean, if there's a comm screen in the shower, or at least in your bathroom, and not just that, like, okay, maybe you could initiate a call and somebody choose to pick up video or not on the other end, but the Doctor can just barge in without a request first. He could just show up on your screen. I at least try to have the good sense if I'm going to initiate a FaceTime call, just start at an audio first. You can switch to video right after that.
Sure.
The Doctor should learn that. And
his excuse was a little weird too. It's like, well, it's nothing I haven't seen before. But I'm like, that's not the point.
No. Different context. Context is everything. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah. And how do we feel about Harry Kim in the big chair? I think they're lining him up for a promotion.
Oh, yeah. I love that. I love that he's there. I love that Chakotay gives him a little bit of ribbing when he says, hey, I heard that. Is it true that the crew calls you Captain Kim? But quickly followed up moments later with, then you don't mind being an ensign again.
Yeah.
Oh, the rise and fall of Harry Kim in literally 2 minutes.
Insult to injury.
Also in that scene, is it me or have Harry and Chakotay started seeing the same hairstylist? Because they literally look, not they, but their hairstyles look exactly the same. Kind of like shorter, higher cropped, and it's a little bit more kind of like combed back.
Yeah.
With Harry, like the way that Chakotay's is.
That was
more lift
such
in his
a
hair.
weird shot because I kind of rewatched that to get Garrett's reaction in that scene. And I was like, there's something odd here about their styling. They don't quite look right.
I'll call him Mini Kim.
Right. Okay, all right. We have seen Tommy Gun Tuvok. But how cool now was Tuvok walking through the corridor with the giant phaser rifle, his security detail flanking him on either side. That is the shot. Tim, I don't know if that is in your demo reel or not, but if you're listening to this, put that in your demo reel because that's just the coolest shot.
Heavy compression assault phaser rifle Tuvok, walking like a boss down the corridor is best Tuvok.
It really is. Yeah, incredible. Good stuff. Really interesting moment of the drone. He has yet to name himself one. Recognizing the fear in the human who walks by. Talk about our background players again, and we get to see a new face here. I thought that was such a subtle but touching moment, and an even better moment of Neelix trying to talk him through that in such a kind, comforting way. Really just like peak for both of these characters.
Yeah, that was a nice scene. And it's interesting, some of the characterizations you're seeing. You're kind of seeing kind of like the stereotypes, of or the archetypes of their characters, like, rising. And it's a little interesting with B'Elanna because she really purses her lips and makes this grimacing expression when she says a 29th century Borg. Now, I'm wondering if it was like a writing or directing note or if Roxanne actually just had that organically in the moment, like that expression.
Yeah.
Because it's really how B'Elanna's feeling all over her face.
Yeah. Well,
right?
And everything, the way this act is structured, like it could come across as is very formulaic, but by taking one from place to place to place to meet all these characters, it really just reveals all these reactions, and it reveals all this about his reaction to their reactions, followed by this really nice scene with the Doctor. One's frustration with not being told his full story, and then getting that out of the Doctor, and the Doctor trying to be as comforting, compassionate as he can. It was all such great stuff.
I have to make a point of the drone's suit, or one's suit. Yeah. Because in certain light, it looks okay, but in direct or overhead light, it does not. Yeah. I just don't like kind of like the softness of it. It looks like it was like poorly molded. It looks like basically they took a Rojan suit and painted it silver.
Yeah, and that's unfortunate. They did do a fresh cast on Bomer, and they put in some intricate lighting, and they spent a lot of time on it, but it does play kind of rubbery, and I wish they had. I wish that the kind of manufacturing technology and materials that are used for effects then, and that wasn't that long ago, are where they are now. Because I think you could do some really cool stuff with materials, supplement it a little with CG, and come up with something really much more radical and interesting. By the way, for Borg, don't they ever lie down? I'm watching them get into the regeneration chambers. I'm like, at some point, somebody's got to lie down. Somebody's got to sit. Maybe not.
I like how he plugs in too. Like when he's facing it, it doesn't interface. But when he puts his back to it, it locks him down and starts charging him. I thought that was kind of neat.
Yeah.
Like there's the fat end and the thin end of a plug.
Yeah.
If you don't do it just right.
You got to do it just right. Exactly.
You do it just right.
Yeah.
Is it a good idea to upload all of Voyager's data into the most advanced Borg drone in existence?
Yeah.
Let's take us on a history lesson here. So when Kirk found Khan in the Botany Bay, he asked, and they didn't know who it was. It's just a stranger.
Yeah.
Can I see all your technical manuals? Because I was once an engineer. I just like to study what's going on.
Uh-huh.
And then he used it against him. So
Yeah.
you know, and he did that by just reading technical manuals.
Yeah, I had a little bit of the same thought, but I guess that, you know, Janeway is confident enough that by absorbing the history of the Federation, such as it is that you have it on a ship like Voyager, hopefully an intelligent being would connect the dots and go like, okay, these are... at least all these moments are hopefully guided by a certain set of ethical principles. But you never know. He could have stumbled across all the data about their encounters with the Borg and just thought, wow, you know, why are they fighting the Borg? These are my people.
Yeah. Yep. I do love the conversation with the Doctor and one about his name. Because the Doctor's journey for, the first couple seasons was all about who he is and how he was going to name himself. So I thought there was some relevance there in that relationship, at least for that moment.
We seem to have forgotten that. But yeah, exactly.
Am I sufficient? What an interesting and complex and layered question from this new life form.
Yeah.
I'll probably bring this up a little bit later in discussion. I think it's a fabulous line and really well acted by Bomer.
I think so. There are a few lines in here that are just so short, but they say so much. And I think we'll come back to those. We haven't seen the Borg sphere in a while. We haven't seen the Borg in a while, actually, but I haven't seen that sphere at all on the small screen in Voyager. So that was kind of cool. And then followed by a matte painting on the inside, which I thought was not great. I mean, again, you know, you're on a TV show, you got a certain budget. We have this cool model left over from First Contact, I assume. But then what do you do with the inside? Well, I think now you would supplement that with a lot more CG, give it a bit more life and a bit more depth. But, you know, you get what you can.
It's weird. Like, why wouldn't it be the same on the inside? If you close up, you know, like if you close in on just the way that the Borg ships were, you know, like populated with all of those chambers, would it matter if it was round or square? As long as you just frame it just right, you're just looking into the ship.
Yeah, right.
So they could have used some of the, you know, stock footage from other shows or movies.
Absolutely, yeah. We were talking about all of the new background characters, and we have, again, more new security team members when they show up in the cargo bay. All of them with those big old compression phaser rifles. So cool. Why they have them, I don't know, because there's still no match for one. They should already know that.
Maybe except for Tuvok.
Yeah.
So when Seven says futile, like as in resistance is futile.
Yeah.
She says it in the non-Locutus way, the non-Patrick Stewart British way.
Yeah.
But one says it, and he says it like Locutus would say it, like resistance is futile.
Yeah.
Or that British way. So I'm wondering if this is a director's decision for him to say it that way, or was this Bomer's decision? Usually actors don't have that kind of leeway, you know, with the way they perform, but it's just one of those things. Like, does that mean that he's more... I don't know, more attuned to the Borg than, say, Seven is?
It's a good question, because it's sort of like Patrick saying data instead of data. And just sort of universally, we all say data now instead of data.
That's big D. Big D data.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Right. Yeah. So I feel like the Borg now are just sort of standardized on saying futile instead of futile. But Seven was a Borg for that whole time and the time that they had assimilated Captain Picard. So why her expression of that didn't change as well, I'm not really sure. I love it as we close out that act. I love one's delivery. For a character with such little emotion and such efficient dialogue saying, what will happen now? Will Voyager be destroyed? Like, it was both innocent and ominous. And I think that's kind of the magic of this character. I thought that was so nice. And then, as we get to Act 5, I got to say, you know, for the end of this show, the ending with Seven, those last couple of minutes in sickbay, and then ending back in the cargo bay, it's perfection. No notes from me.
It's unfortunate one didn't stay around. We could have had a Voyager Kids spin-off with Naomi Wildman and one at school. Not weird at all.
We'll get right back to Drone after a word from this week's sponsors. Let's dive into something here that might give you a bit of a chill. Sorry here, but imagine, okay, it's a dark and stormy night, and someone is keeping a log of everything you do every minute of the day. That's creepy, right?
That is creepy. And here's the kicker.
Yeah.
That's exactly what happens every time you hop online. Your internet provider, whether it's AT&T or Verizon, can legally store logs of every website you've ever visited and sell that data to anyone willing to pay for it. Talk about the invasion of privacy body snatchers.
Chills. Yeah, exactly. It chills up my spine just hearing that scary story. Yeah, it's enough to make you want to go off the grid entirely. But fear not, listeners, because we've got a solution. ExpressVPN.
That's right, John. ExpressVPN reroutes your internet connection through their secure servers so your internet provider can't see or log what you're up to online.
And here's the beauty of it. ExpressVPN uses trusted server technology. They were the first major VPN provider to engineer all of their servers to run on RAM only. That means it's impossible for their servers to store any data, including logs of your online activity.
Now, all of you out there might be wondering, but Mission Log guys, wait. I mean, doesn't that mean that VPN can see what I'm doing and log my data instead? I mean, that's a valid concern, right? But ExpressVPN is so confident in their no logs claim, they had PwC, one of the biggest assurance firms, audit their technology.
And you know what else? ExpressVPN has been named the #1 VPN in the world by CNET and The Verge, and that is some serious credibility right there.
Stop letting people keep logs of what you do online. Visit expressvpn.com/missionlog right now and find out how you can get 3 months free. That's expressvpn.com/missionlog. expressvpn.com/missionlog to learn more.
All right, Norman and dear friends and listeners, let's take a little step into the cinematic universe of the Star Trek Kelvin timeline with our friends over at Master Replicas. Yes, that's right. You can relive the awe-inspiring moments from the big screen with their meticulously crafted replicas, capturing the essence of the iconic Starfleet vessels and Klingon warships from the thrilling Kelvin timeline movies. And right now, you can get them for a special price, 3 for the price of 2.
Wow, that's amazing.
It's really good. Let's talk about some of our favorite ships, shall we?
Just as amazing as that deal, you have these gorgeous ships like the Kelvin replica. You can experience the nostalgia of that unforgettable opening shot of 2009 as you behold the majestic Kelvin, the epitome of Starfleet's dedication to exploration and discovery. Own a piece of Star Trek history with this classic starship replica.
I still say it. That's like my favorite opening 8 minutes of almost any movie, and the Kelvin is a gorgeous ship. Yeah.
But not to be outdone by the Kelvin, you also have the ultimate hot rod in space. That's right, the USS Enterprise replica. Also embodies the speed and style and the spirit of adventure. Immerse yourself in the sleek and dynamic design envisioned by the talented minds behind the Kelvin timeline movies. What else do we have?
Oh, yeah. Well, let's talk about some of those adversarial ships, shall we? Like the Vengeance-class dreadnought. Yes, behold the sheer power and intimidation of Admiral Marcus's formidable vessel, the Vengeance. And, Admiral Marcus, pretty formidable himself. With its imposing presence and cutting-edge design, this replica showcases the pinnacle of Starfleet's military might. Oh, yeah, we're going to have things to say about that when we get there on Mission Log. And let's talk about those Klingon ships. Witness the mastery of Klingon engineering with the intricately detailed bird of prey replica. Crafted with real physics in mind, this ship embodies the deadly grace and tactical prowess of the Klingon Empire. They'll be so glad that I described them that way.
And don't forget the wonderful, highly detailed and very sought-after collector's editions. If you would like to dive deeper into the world of Star Trek with exclusive collector's editions, they feature insights from renowned designers such as Ryan Church, James Klein, and Alex Yeager. Explore the artistry and the innovation behind the creation of these beloved starships. Don't miss your chance to own these iconic pieces of sci-fi history Explore the stars in style with Master Replica's Star Trek Kelvin Timeline Collection. Beam up your favorites today at masterreplicas.com and get 3 for the price of 2. That's masterreplicas.com.
So I think I've said this on a handful of occasions before in Mission Log, drawing this exact same parallel. But you remember that Saturday Night Live sketch that was the Chris Farley show? Mm-hmm. And he would have on like Sir Paul McCartney, and he would say, hey, you remember when you were in the Beatles and you did the Ed Sullivan show? That was great. And like that's the whole show, right? Mm-hmm. It's just Chris Farley being a nervous fanboy. I kind of feel like that with this episode. Not because I'm too nervous to talk about it, but I feel like all the work has already been done. And I can't really offer much more to it because everything is there on screen. Everything is done. And I know that I'm skipping ahead to our wrap up here by saying this, but I want to say this to preface our discussion. I feel like there's some great discussion points, but I also feel like anything that we discuss is just yes-anding what has already been done in the script. You know,
I hope I surprise you. I hope
you do too. So I'm going to just go to like a couple of small moments here and spread mine out a little bit. As important as one is in this episode, our star player is Seven, because we know that Seven's going to be back next week.
Yeah.
And this episode is just full of these huge moments for this character. I love how we bookend it with the mirror. What a perfect metaphor. What a perfect way for her to examine herself, literally and figuratively, in her life on board Voyager, from two extreme emotions as well. So like it just as a framing device that needs no dialogue or explanation, I think it's absolutely poetically beautiful. But there are other incredibly important moments in here for Seven. We get this glimpse of Seven on a journey, not just from being the student, the child, the subordinate to Janeway as she has been. And of course, she is vulnerable. She needs to be protected. Like all of these things make sense. But here it is early in our journey with Seven of Nine. And Janeway gets to flip the script and put Seven in the role now of being the mentor, the teacher, the mother, the protector, all of these things for one. And not just that, but also kind of, I guess we should say, the intellectual and the ethical interpreter for something that is very complex to grasp. Because Seven has already been fighting this urge to go back to the collective, fighting this urge to reclaim her identity and figure out who she really is. And now she's got to explain that to somebody who she both cares for and is also potentially the biggest threat that has ever set foot on this ship. When one says to Seven, "Do you wish to rejoin the collective?" and she says, "Voyager is my collective," that's as profound and important for the character as it is when we pointed out several episodes ago that it was the first time Seven referred to herself as I, not as we.
Right.
And this is, and I love now that we've spent a year with this character and we've gotten these really crucial moments to show how she's transformed since the time we first met her in Scorpion.
I mean, I know it makes for interesting drama, but is it really a good idea to put Seven in charge of teaching, this other new life form, the ways of humanity when she herself is still struggling with the finer nuances of becoming more human? So there's the scene where, first of all, when Janeway instructs her and says, you are going to be taken care of in introducing this drone to humanity, there's a question and a statement that she says. She says, "I am to instruct the drone in the ways of humanity," which is kind of like a fact, but also a question, like, why me? Mm-hmm. And Jerry really does ride those fine lines in her interpretation, of these specific lines of dialogue. But Seven says to the drone, "You are not part of the collective. You are an individual. You will receive your instructions from me." Now, again, we are dealing with a childlike mind.
Yeah.
Who really understands more Borg logic than human logic. So as an individual, yes, but receives orders. Those are contradictory terms, right? Those are contradictory parameters in terms of human behavior. So Seven does not have a true understanding of the human condition in order to make sense of the complexities of all these different nuances. So the drone is unable to comply. And we saw that. And there's some frustration. There is some confusion. And I really do like that they bring in Neelix later to help, the drone's kind of like his evolution, or his kind of like rapid evolution of understanding. But humanity requires patience.
Yeah.
It requires, to the point of absurdity sometimes. There are on occasions, we've had conversations with Discord members about Seven and saying, like, you have to treat her as you would a child, because a child doesn't know that it's doing wrong. And if you get angry with a child for doing something wrong, it further damages the psyche or the relationship with the child. So it's something that Seven doesn't grasp yet. She's still struggling with it on her own. And I'm just, again, it makes for a great story, but is it really the right thing to do to put that kind of responsibility in her hands?
Well, yeah, what you're proposing is a huge challenge. However, I think there genuinely is something to be said for what I think is part of Janeway's decision-making, which is sometimes the way to learn something is to then be forced to teach that thing, because Janeway can kind of just explain as many lessons as she wants to. Look at how many times Janeway has sat Seven down with a story. Like, I'm going to tell you a story to try to explain this very humanistic principle, or this ethical principle, and then Seven's like, yeah, that's irrelevant. I'm going to leave and do my own thing, But it's a very different thing when you say, okay, now you have a responsibility. And by the way, that responsibility is one of your own. So there's an immediate connection there that it is literally, he is partly her. He is made out of her nanoprobes. True. So this is one of your own. And you can only get so much from reading this in a book or on a pad, which only contains one book. So
you're lucky.
Yeah, right. So what we're going to do now is have a little bit of a trial by fire. And the way that you learn from me, now we're going to turn it around, and you will become the teacher, and you will get to experience firsthand how somebody learns, whether they accept the lessons or they don't. And you see it happen over and over again in this episode. Seven has to change her approach with one. And she's got to sometimes be compassionate, sometimes be firm, cut him off. Like, yes, you want knowledge, but you can't have that. I like that whole scene of him getting in the regeneration alcove. It's like putting a 3-year-old to bed.
Well, sure, and he's also had his share of tantrums, during the course of the episode as well.
Yeah. So I get it. Like, there's a risk there, and you have to think that in the hierarchy, okay, Seven is still not technically... definitely not part of Starfleet. She is part of the crew, in quotes, but she still has to have some supervision. Janeway is still responsible for her. So at the high end of the hierarchy, you've got Janeway watching over that, and hopefully Tuvok making sure that one doesn't get too much knowledge about too much that is, of strategic concern to the ship. But I think it's a pretty inspired idea to let Seven take on that personality. Okay, but with that experience and with these changes in Seven that we see, and that's why I kicked off the conversation with that observation that I did, what does that mean for Seven next week or the week after or the week after that? Because these are important moments. They really are. And if we're just back to an insubordinate Seven, or if we're just back to a Seven who could take it or leave it with humanity, then that's a massive step backward.
Yeah. Great points. And I want to bring up something also that it's a little sensitive. I just want to, not a trigger warning, I don't think, but I think there are some sensitive topics that what I would like to discuss will bring up. First of all, the point I'm trying to make is called Tuvix redux. Okay, so there are examples of a certain psychology or a pattern that I'm seeing in this episode when it comes to relating all the way back to Janeway's decision in Tuvix. So earlier on in the episode, Tuvok says to Janeway about the drone. He asks her, "You intend to let it mature?" Janeway says, "The alternative is to pull the plug, and I'm not prepared to do that, not unless I have to." I'm curious if the writers knew about this or understood this particular phrasing, quote unquote, pull the plug. Because I took it this way, and maybe others might take it this way, as leaning towards abortion of some kind.
Yep.
Since we are essentially dealing with what Tuvok described earlier as a drone in the quote unquote fetal stage. Now later, between Janeway and Seven, Janeway says, "What I'm proposing is the only defense we have against that possibility short of murder, and that's an order I'd prefer not to give." This is in reference to what are we going to do with one if he turns. Now, without dwelling on the decision she had to make about Tuvix, when Janeway says, "short of murder," do you think that there's a moment here of reflection that it's not shown on camera, but in her character about Tuvix that's informing her of her current course of action? Giving one a little bit more leeway and a little bit more freedom and flexibility to evolve before something bad happens.
That's an interesting question, and it's really two parts there. I mean, I thought about the abortion metaphor in that conversation as well. That definitely came to mind, especially given what you're saying here, that this is a Borg in the fetal stage, and I thought all of that was kind of rife with room for that interpretation. But then you get to Tuvix, and I feel like we're having a slightly different conversation. Tuvix, the only way to defend Janeway's action is to say, well, Janeway started out with 2 crew members who got taken away. She's going to get those 2 crew members back, and what it means is that the needs of the many, Neelix and Tuvok, outweigh the needs of the few, which is this new guy, Tuvix. Now, I don't want to re-debate Tuvix because that is a whole thing, I feel like this is maybe only very slightly different, and there are many hairs to split when it comes to this discussion. Maybe it's only very slightly different because this new life form has been created out of whole cloth, given a piece of 29th century technology, a piece of 24th century Borg technology, and a little taste of DNA. And notice we never see or hear from Mulcahy again.
Yeah.
So he really has no say in this at all. I kind of wanted to see these 2 in the same room at some point.
That would have been great. What a great scene. Yeah.
Right? So I like to think that Janeway is starting always from a position of scientific curiosity and preservation of life and doing the least damage, like the Doctor, doing no harm to start.
Right. Yeah.
But there's the strategic concern here over the ship. And will we ever get to a point where if one didn't want to cooperate, would she do a site-to-site transport and throw him into space? It's possible. Yeah.
But I think that's where kind of it leads me into my next point. And a question I want to ask you and I want to ask our audience, is Janeway more interested in what one can do rather than who he is? Because at the end, Janeway says to one, with your advanced technology, the collective would become even more destructive. We have to prevent that from happening, but we can't do it without you. We need your abilities to enhance our defenses, shields, weapons. Will you help us resist them? So I have to ask, I'm not saying that this is a wrong thing. She's, like you said, she is first and foremost about the preservation of her ship and her crew and their journey home. So is this Janeway's real agenda for one? To keep him for herself and away from the Borg, because one represents the true shift in the power balance between the Borg and Voyager in the Delta Quadrant. One is their best chance at getting home, either by his own technological know-how, because we saw what he could do with the phasers and the shields and all that kind of stuff, but also because if they clear the Borg, he's their best line of defense against anything ahead of them as well. Yeah. So does she care more about what he can do than who he is?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. And I think, I don't even know if he's aware of that, but I think he's aware that he has a role to fill as well, you know? But I think Janeway would also size up anybody like that who comes. Not that she needs to get rid of someone, but even Neelix. Okay, Neelix comes on board. What can he do? Because this is a ship with finite resource and so many people that have to be cared for and gotten home safely. So even like somebody like Neelix comes on board, and yeah, he's not maybe a strategic genius, but if he can cook, well, guess what? We're going to need a cook. So I'm going to throw him in there. And now along comes this technological marvel, and maybe there is a certain risk involved to having him on board, but if he can learn the values that everybody else on the ship presumably shares, then it's sort of a win-win. We have a strategic advantage, and we have this being that shares our values, and kind of, I think there's an element to that that's so interesting because it sort of disproves the idea that the Borg are bad because of the technology. Like, obviously, we can point to the Borg and say this is technology run amok, this is a program that has run amok, and it does not care about what it assimilates in the course of pursuing perfection or just pursuing more and more knowledge, right? Mm-hmm. Because this story says that if you introduce this humanistic, thoughtful element into it, the technology at that point kind of becomes irrelevant because the technology can still be there, even beyond that technology. And you can still have a functioning member of the crew who shares our values. I want to come back to this line here as I'm saying that, because we were talking about the efficiency of the script earlier. And there are these three words again that I just thought were so great. Am I unwelcome? And I love that as the central thesis here, because it kind of ties back to what you were saying. Like there is the value of one as a person. There is also the value of one as a potential crew member or a potential technology source. Mm-hmm. But it's really, the story then becomes about the values that the Voyager crew brings to someone who, under even just a very slightly different circumstance, could be assimilated into a collective that does not value the lives of others, only values the existence of the collective, and that's it. And on top of that, we get this lovely story about a person who is trying to find their meaning, to find their heart, and to find their place in the universe. So I love that those three lines, the three words rather, am I unwelcome, both as a presence on board the ship, but also in the greater scheme of existence. This is somebody who does not know who he is and is just trying to get the answers for it. See also Star Trek the Motion Picture.
Let's check in with Norman and John to see if they thought one was a singular sensation.
We have made it to the end of Drone, and it was a interesting conversation that we had during especially our discussion, made some really interesting observations, and just like we do with every single Mission Log episode, we come to the end and we look at a few things. We look to see if the episode holds up, to see if it withstands the test of time, and then we see if we were able to find any morals or meanings or messages contained quote unquote therein, not to belabor the point or not to belabor or drone on with the description of this. But, we might have some new listeners, hopefully, to the show, and this is what we do. Yeah. And we're going to start these final thoughts with Mr. John Champion and how he felt about this episode.
First, we've pointed out a lot of the cool things that we've noticed, like the different background players and just the additions to the crew, and certain things just kind of look and feel a little better in this episode, little moments like that. But I also want to point out that this episode is directed really well. There is a lot of good use of close-ups and handheld cameras, and I have to give credit to Les Landau and my all-time favorite Marvin Rush, of course, especially during the action scenes. I mean, we kind of made light of Action Tuvok walking down that corridor with the phaser rifle, but that's just a great shot. And there's another shot later on, I think in Act 5, where they're doing battle with the Borg. You have this close-up on Seven, and there's like smoke trailing up from behind her on the bridge, and it's just like some fantastic shots. You could take a still out of any one of those moments and they would look incredible. Things are creatively lit. The visual work all around is just stunning. But then you also get to dial that back, and you get to have these intimate, quiet, really character-driven scenes. And that is the heart of this episode. And I have to hand it to our guest star here, J. Paul Boehmer. You don't really have a ton to work with as a Borg drone, theoretically. But then when those moments of humanity creep through, he's just wonderful. And it's sort of like Jerry in that respect, where Boehmer just perfectly delivers this blend of danger and vulnerability and innocence, but with power. He's really compelling to watch. And I will say the one scene that we're missing is him with Mulcahy, but even without that, this episode really fires on all the levels of having very high concept sci-fi to deal with. This whole thing about, well, you got nanoprobes, you got 29th century technology, and you've got a DNA extraction, and then they grow fast. Okay, you have all of that to wrap your head around. But then you just also have this really simple, really heartfelt story about somebody trying to find their place in the universe. And I think that's what makes this exceptional. It is really a great piece of storytelling for Voyager's overall arc, but also just as a slice of what is representative of Star Trek. So does it hold up? Yeah, it does. How about you, Norm?
Yeah, I'm right with you, John. I loved this episode. I really did. And I think I know why. I didn't really understand it at first, when you said all of the episode presents itself on screen. And I think it's because all of the moments that we see on screen have been previously earned. And I think that's really important.
Yeah.
Let's go all the way back to season 4, the Scorpion arc, the Raven. All of Seven's moments that weren't earned then were building blocks to how she is earning those moments, those payoffs now. And especially kind of like the tension and the relationship or lack thereof between Seven and Janeway during the course of season 4 is kind of starting to smooth out a little bit in this episode. Again, because those moments were earned. We just don't have these moments just because, which would have made this episode feel a little bit more forced, but it wasn't. I never really felt a false beat in this episode.
Yeah.
I think that we have seen episodes like this before. I mean, this is essentially the freak transporter accident. You go all the way back to Enemy Within, in the original series. And Thomas Riker, I mean, probably one of the most famous transporter accident byproducts ever, in Star Trek. Right. So that's not necessarily new to this, but this is one of the better, or maybe one of the best examples right now in Star Trek that I've seen because of what we do with the byproduct of that accident, what we do with one. I love how the crew helped one examine all the different facets of the human condition. So it wasn't just really about Seven's involvement. You had Neelix. You had even B'Elanna with her terseness, and understanding, like just him and Janeway. I love how he always wanted to present himself in the best possible way in front of Janeway. He was always buttoned up. He was always polite, and very, very pleasing. Very in contrast to Seven and her demeanor with Janeway. So I thought that was interesting.
Yeah.
I think that the Janeway 7-in-1 dynamic was really balanced in this episode. Because for the most of season 4, you just saw like Seven and Janeway just bashing their personalities and their heads together, and it got very overdone.
Yeah.
Right, to the point where it was almost expected.
Yeah.
Right, but in this episode, because of Seven's added responsibilities and personally, to one's development, I think that helped, again, make it for a more earned relationship. And you're right, J. Paul Boehmer was amazing as one. And you're right, he didn't have a lot to work with, but what he worked with was very, very believable and good. And his desire to be, quote unquote, sufficient really sold his desire in the performance. If there is one criticism I can make, and this is more of a personal desire, I wish that Act 5 went a different way instead of the standard Borg threat that led to what I kind of loathe about it being a telegraphed conclusion, the sacrificial conclusion, right?
Yeah.
There's so much good character development happening with one. And you're right, we missed that one moment between one and Mulcahy. Maybe it was Mulcahy who taught him what self-sacrifice really means. Why he's serving in Starfleet. And he goes, they could have been, imagine this, John. They could, writer's hat goes on.
Yeah.
They could be in sickbay. Mulcahy's, he's recovering from the puncture wounds from the tubules that essentially gave birth to one.
Yeah.
And one could have asked, why are you doing this out here? It's because it's worth the sacrifice. Right? Just that one moment. Then you would have had the understanding from quote unquote mother and the understanding and the lesson learned from quote unquote father.
Yeah.
To give him the ability to understand the empathy at the end when he sacrifices himself for the greater of Voyager, for where he belonged. That's the one thing I think that was missing, that kind of got taken over by the tropish Borg attack.
Yeah.
I thought that was a little bit of a misstep, but otherwise the scene where he chose to sacrifice himself, the scene at the end with Jerry, it was great. It was perfect. I loved it. Absolutely.
That's really interesting stuff that you're bringing up, and I'm thinking that certainly is a place that we could have shoehorned in a scene with Mulcahy, and maybe there's something like that in one of the drafts, but I feel like it's such an odd thing for him to literally have given birth to this being, and then we never see him again. That seems like a big oversight. But I will say this, that the trick always with episodic TV like this is that you can bring in these incredible guest stars, but then you have to get rid of the guest stars because you have to make sure that your series stars, your leads, are the ones who are getting all the good material because they're going to be back the next week. And it's like the guest stars, to an extent, can only serve to keep pushing your main stars forward and to put the focus back on those main stars. So this is a real balancing act, and it's like we get somebody as good as this, such an interesting character as one, played so well by J. Paul Boehmer, but then that they have to be gone at the end. So did they serve that purpose well? Well, I think really this is Seven's story, so... And in that case, you saying that these moments were earned, they were certainly earned for her because they pay off what we've gotten now in a year's worth of time with Seven. So, yeah, it's a tricky thing, and I guess it kind of has to end with sacrifice, but does it need to be exactly the way we saw it play? Well, when we get to our morals, meanings, messages here, I think there's so much to hit upon, and there are so many like truly heartfelt moments in this episode. But I just want to focus on one because I'm going to go to another very short line that I think is so expressive and so important to understanding not just the character, but the heart and soul of the episode, and I think really speaks to a bigger idea of Star Trek. One says, "I was never meant to be." And on the surface, that sounds so sad, so heartbreaking to hear a character sum up his life or his lack of understanding of his role that way. It is a very profoundly complex line to hear from somebody like one. And he might be so innocent, so inexperienced, that he is just thinking the literal truth of that. I was not meant to be. I am an accident. But let's dig deeper on that. So yeah, one is the result of a transporter accident. But I wish we had time to discuss purpose and meaning with him, because we're kind of getting there. At the end of the day, we're all accidents in some respect or another. Nobody chooses the specific genes that came together to be you, but rather you are the result of multiple factors that are all out of your hands. So we're all kind of an accident that wasn't meant to be exactly the way that you are from any moment to another. Now, what one does realize then, and I think he got this in his moment of sacrifice, and that's why he acted the way he did, is that purpose and function and meaning is something that he chooses for himself. He chooses it in his actions, and he chooses it to protect his family. And it's dramatic and beautiful to see it play out like that, even though we'll be very heartbroken to see him go. That is where the meaning in his life that he says that he was not meant to be, that is where the meaning comes from. And I think that's a lesson that we see over and over, not just in Star Trek, but in a lot of great literature. Star Trek happens to have the breadth and the flexibility and the freedom to play that out very often. But when we talk about Star Trek as the crews here representing the family that you choose, because they are friends, because they are coworkers, because they are part of the crew, and that's what gives people meaning. I think we've seen that expressed here in a really lovely way. How about you, Norman?
Well, I have a question to ask you, John.
Sure.
So you have a 29th century Borg drone, and he steps up to the plate. And you know what that moment is for him? What time it is for him?
Teamwork.
It's the time for individual achievement.
Yes.
I couldn't help myself because it was it's such a heavy topic. What one did at the end, it was because he was an individual that he was able to do that.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. Because he had the wherewithal, what did they say in Measure of a Man? That he had sentient self-awareness.
Yeah, right.
Of who he was and what he was doing, and he had the understanding of his own decision-making processes. I'm going to pivot a little bit towards something that I was discussing a little bit earlier in discussion about, was it a good idea for Seven to be put in charge of one's development? Because the moral I get from this episode is humanity is constantly evolving. And Seven is still growing in the ways of humanity herself. We know this, and struggles with some of the finer nuances of becoming more human. But we all do, right? Understanding what it means to be human isn't a destination. Mm-hmm. There's no end goal in sight. There isn't a final goal. There's no terminus for the data that, one keeps wanting to learn more and more and more until he finally, like a Borg does, assimilate whatever data is in front of him.
Right.
But there's always more. There's always a choice, a nuance, a pattern of behavior, something you can see and taste and touch and feel and smell and everything. And then all of a sudden multiply all of those experiences by 1,000, and then you have a minute of somebody's life. That's how complex it really, really gets. It can't be codified, can't be categorized, as Seven would like to, as she's trying to. And she's trying to demonstrate all of these different logistics to one. But human complexities are messy. That's the point, right? Yeah. They're contradictory. They're confusing. They're painful. They're beautiful. They're heartbreaking. They're inspirational. And you're trying to get all this in one's education, before he leaves the end of the episode, which is, again, it's an impossibility because the goalposts keep moving for humanity. Once we figure out something else changes. I haven't quoted Rush in a while, John. So I'm going to sum up my thoughts about human dynamics in this lyric from their song Prime Mover.
Nice.
Basic elemental, instinct to survive, stirs the higher passions, thrill to be alive. alternating currents in a tidewater surge, rational resistance to an unwise urge. Anything can happen.
Mission Log is produced by Roddenberry Entertainment. If you'd like to support us directly, you can do so at patreon.com/missionlog for early access to shows and the Mission Log Discord. Our website is missionlogpodcast.com, and for more Star Trek news and discussion, visit trekmovie.com.
On the next Mission Log, Extreme Risk.
Some of the music for Mission Log provided by Warp 11, online at warp11.com. Special thanks to consulting producers, Matt Esposito, Homer Frizzell, Julie Miller, Mike Richards, Mike Shadwell, Paul Shadwell, and David Takechi. So now we have a backup of the Doctor. Couldn't we have made a backup of one? Does this crew even know how backups work? End transmission.
This is a Roddenberry podcast. For more great podcasts, visit podcast.roddenberry.com.